Next, we have a really exciting presentation about a project that many of you probably have heard about, but may not know the specifics. Park City Wind will establish Bridgeport as an American hub for the emerging U.S. offshore wind industry. The potential for real long-term economic growth is enormous. We'll hear today how Park City Wind will create thousands of new jobs and generate $890 million in direct economic benefits across the life of this clean energy project. We're pleased to bring you today Jennifer Cullen, who's the Manager of Workforce and Supply Chain Development at Vineyard Wind. Previous to this, she spent over 10 years in the nonprofit sector advocating for policies that promote clean energy and clean water in communities throughout the US. Jen is originally from Cape Cod and has extensive experience working to build support for offshore wind in the community. Welcome.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Heather. My name is Jennifer Cullen. I'm Vineyard Wind's Manager of Workforce and Supply Chain Development. Park City Wind is a project that is proposed to deliver clean offshore wind energy to the state of Connecticut. And we won a bid to do this in December of last year. So we're fairly new to the game in Connecticut, but we're very excited to be here. Just to kind of walk through, we'll start with an introduction of the project, do a project overview. I'll speak to some of our economic development initiatives and our supply chain work in Connecticut, and then we'll leave a few minutes for Q&A. Looks like Julie Mar's on. So Julie Mar, do you want to take it from here? I'll just keep my slides up.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. How are you? I'm Julie Mar, excuse me, government and community. Excuse me, I have a stutter in this morning for some reason. It's being extra naughty. So I just want to kind of give a project overview, and I'll start with a little bit about.
We're having some technical difficulties on our end this morning. Apologies, everyone. All right, well, I'll keep going, I guess, until Julie Mar's audio comes back. So Julie Mar, if you can hear me, just turn whenever you're back. So Park City Wind is an 804 megawatt offshore wind farm. So we'll be constructing massive turbines in the water. The map here is big, so the components on it are fairly small, but you can see south of Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard, there's a lease area in the ocean here. That's where we'll be building and the actual wind farm. So it will not be visible from anywhere in Connecticut or Rhode Island. So you'll be able to see some of the turbines from the islands in Massachusetts, but they're 15 plus miles offshore for our first project, which is in the north end of this lease area. And for Park City Wind, which is even further south, you actually won't be able to see any of the turbines. Our operations and maintenance facility, which is where we'll run the long-term operations and maintenance, will go out of Bridgeport. So the technicians that will take care of the turbines every day will go out of Bridgeport. They will essentially live offshore for a couple weeks at a time on a vessel within the wind turbine area to take care of those turbines every day. The cable from the wind farm will make landfall in West Barnstable on Cape Cod. And because of the way New England's grid is set up, you can really land a cable anywhere in New England and sell power to elsewhere in New England. So we'll be landing the cable in Massachusetts, but the power will be sold to Connecticut ratepayers. And timeline-wise, we'll go through a little bit more of a detailed timeline, but we expect to be entirely commercially operational in 2025. So who is Vineyard Wind? Vineyard Wind's a joint venture between two companies, one called Avangrid Renewables, which is a leading provider of renewable energy in the US, and has Avangrid, its parent company, has presence within Connecticut. Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners is a Danish pension fund that invests in renewable energy projects. They've built projects all over the world, and they have some of the deepest knowledge of how offshore wind works. Some of the colleagues that we work with have been working in offshore wind since it was invented, practically. Vineyard Wind itself, we are headquartered out of New Bedford in Massachusetts. We have an office in Boston. We're looking to establish our Connecticut office very soon. And it's really critical to us to employ local employees on the projects. So Julie Marr is a Bridgeport native. She knows that community inside and out. We're really excited to have her on the team. I'm originally from the Cape and actually the town where the project's making landfall. And we just understand how important it is to have that community engagement as you go through these complex, very big projects that require a lot of stakeholder engagement, a lot of permitting on all levels, from federal, state, right down to local conservation commissions. And so, you know, Vineyard Wind as a company, we're still relatively small. We have a little over 100 people involved in the entire project, but we do have deep knowledge from the renewable energy and offshore wind development side, right down to the communities that we're dealing with. A little bit about offshore wind and how we got to where we are now with these projects. Offshore wind has existed in Europe for over 2 decades. There are over 4,000 offshore wind turbines in the world spinning and producing clean electricity. This technology is not new. It's just new to us here in the US. There's a project proposed that many of you probably have heard of called Cape Wind that was proposed for this little donut hole of federal waters between Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. That proposal came out in 2001 and was met with heavy opposition because of its location. The technology, even at that point, had been established and was working, you know, over in Europe. And because of a lot of the conflicts that that project faced, the federal government saw the opportunity in offshore wind, especially because we have such fantastic winds up here in New England, and we also have a high demand for energy. So they went through this process through the federal government to identify where would be appropriate sites for these projects. So essentially, through a very long and engaged stakeholder process, there was identified several areas that would be appropriate for wind energy, one of which is off of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. There are others further down the coast, but they took this area here with these colored blocks and they broke it into lease areas, all kind of roughly the same size. They looked at what other uses were happening in the ocean, what were the winds, how did they blow, the depth of the water, and tried to find the most appropriate area to place this kind of infrastructure. Then, kind of as that process was happening on the federal level, the states who had been working to advance renewable energy targets and goals over the last several years saw this opportunity happening right off their coasts. And the state of Massachusetts kind of moved first and was followed quickly by other states in the Northeast to say, we want offshore winds. And so they went out with requesting bids from different developers. And Vineyard Wind bid into the state of Massachusetts in 2017 with our project proposal there. We won the project in 2018, and that really kicked off other states going through a similar process because we realized that renewable energy, and especially offshore wind, because of the scale you can build it at and the amount, you know, the trajectory that technology had taken over the last 2 decades in Europe, it was extremely cost competitive. So now the states are saying, wait a minute, we have this fantastic renewable energy resource. We know we can tap it, and we can tap it and do it in a cost competitive way. This is kind of a no-brainer. So that's why the state of Connecticut last year, when they went out and they said, we want more offshore winds, Vineyard Wind bid in its Park City Wind project and was awarded in December of last year. Okay, so this slide here on the right shows you all the federal offshore wind lease areas that have been identified by the federal agency, which is called Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, falls under Department of Interior. So they found that all of these areas had minimal ocean use conflicts, good wind, and a good bottom to anchor offshore wind turbines. And you can see the names associated with each of these lease areas are the companies that have gone out and leased that space in a competitive process and are now working through the process of permitting and developing the actual projects within there. On the left side here, we just kind of attached a couple of pictures of what the ports look like. One of the ports, one of the the biggest challenges we have as an industry is limited port capacity. So we have a port out of Massachusetts in New Bedford that we'll be utilizing for our turbines for our Massachusetts projects. For Connecticut, we're anticipating using the Barnum Landing site in Bridgeport to do some of our foundation work. So those yellow pieces you see at that Bridgeport site, they're called transition pieces. And they're that yellow piece that sits and connects the foundation of the turbine that gets hammered into the seafloor to the turbine tower. There's a lot of complex pieces in there. It can, it's where the electrical infrastructure starts. It's where the crew that does the operations and maintenance boards the turbine. So we're really excited to be able to do that work out of Bridgeport.
Jen, I'll let you catch your breath a little bit because I know you got
Oh, good, you're back. Okay.
Yeah, I plugged in my headphones. Sorry about that, everyone. So yeah, I'll just give a little bit of the project timeline. We do have, a few years before this is up and running. We got our permit, our bid from the state in December 2019. This year and next year, we're really going to be doing our federal permitting, our project design, and stakeholder and community outreach, which is what my job is. So if you have any suggestions on that piece, please contact me. We'll have our contact, I believe it's the last slide, so you'll be able to get that. And then we'll be anticipating construction at Barnum Landing in 2023 and in Massachusetts as well. And then offshore construction 2024 with the project up and running, hopefully, fingers crossed that, we got our permits and everything by 2025. And so this project comes with a ton of benefits, and Jen will kind of go over a little bit of what our plan is on the supply chain side.
Okay, so one of the biggest reasons that the states are going out for these projects is, of course, the energy and specifically the clean energy. But there are also a ton of economic benefits that can be reaped from this industry. It's major infrastructure that requires a lot of components, big construction works, a lot of support, and then the long-term jobs of taking care of and running these facilities. So when we bid projects into the states, they want to know what those economic benefits are and how we're going to deliver them to the state. So as part of our Park City Wind proposal, we developed a suite of economic development initiatives. And the two main ones that I'm going to touch on today are our Windward Workforce Program and our Supply Chain Network Initiative. So for workforce, like I said, it's not a new industry worldwide, but it is new to the US. So when it comes to how we're going to develop, construct, and then run these projects, it requires training up local workers. And so we are going to be working with partners in the state and alongside the state to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get the Connecticut workforce ready for this industry. We're also recognizing that the supply chain currently exists in Europe. So Europe has been doing these for years. They know where their suppliers are. Their suppliers, have all of the components and resources needed to build these projects. But coming over here to the US, one of the biggest ways we can capture the economic benefits is by supporting and encouraging the local supply chain. So I'll speak to that a little bit too and how we plan to do that. In terms of workforce development, we have the development phase of the projects, the construction phase of the project, operations and maintenance, which is the long term, and then the supply chain. And within each of these buckets, there are different workforces that we're going to need. And so as part of our proposal for Park City Wind, we are working through identifying partners that can help us with this, educational institutions, labor unions. The project will be constructed using union labor from the local trades, which will involve apprenticeships, pre-apprenticeships, opening up those opportunities. We'll need to train technicians for O&M. And then all of the jobs as the supply chain kind of caters to the industry, all the jobs associated with making sure that we have the workers within the supply chain to feed into the industry. So in terms of supply chain, there are a lot of components that go into these projects. Obviously, the turbines are the most visible and some of the most exciting new technology. but there's a lot of logistics and other infrastructure support that require resources. And it's everything from, you know, when the workers are working out of the port facilities, making sure that they have kind of the basic resources they need in terms of safety equipment and smaller components. And then there's also opportunities for local companies to either supply kind of those tier 2 needs to the major components, or work toward upgrading businesses and manufacturing in order to serve those needs. So really the biggest thing that we're looking to do with this supply chain initiative is work with some local partners to identify where those supply chain opportunities are and where existing businesses are best suited to meet them. And a lot of that is a big educational lift with just connecting the existing major suppliers with the local resources. Over time, it's going to become much more cost effective and efficient for us to be sourcing as much as we can domestically. The US is a very long way from Europe, where the supply chain is, and there's a lot that you can bring over here, but we'd ideally like to be sourcing as much as we can from the US. And businesses and the business community are really excited to do that. They're just looking for the information about, well, what does that mean? What do these projects need? How do we supply them? So through a series of events and kind of some educational efforts and information sharing, we're planning on doing everything we can to anchor the supply chain in Connecticut around what the needs for the project will be. Just to kind of show, I'll go through this quickly and we'll get to questions, but there are several supply chain tiers. So the tier 1s are the major components. So foundation, turbines, the offshore substation, cables, and most of that, at least for the first few projects, are going to come from Europe because we just don't have the manufacturing here until we have the industry. That said, there's a lot of tier 2 and tier 3 needs that we absolutely could meet here in the US. And it, you know, half the challenge is finding the right companies that can provide those services. And again, a lot of that's going to be information sharing and then just making sure we've got a pipeline of projects. Julie Marr touched on it a little bit in the timeline, but the permitting process for this is extremely cumbersome. Vineyard Wind 1 has been going through the permitting for going on 3 years now. We expect to have those final permits any day, but we really, as a country, need to send the signals to the industry that we're serious about anchoring the supply chain here and building those projects in order to encourage those businesses to invest in supplying those services. All right, and with that, I guess we'll kick it over to questions.
Thanks a lot. We have some great ones dropping in. One is, has the National Renewable Energy Lab, U.S. Center for Wind Research and Tech Support, been a resource for this project?
I can speak to that. I know that NREL has been doing recently, especially studies on the workforce aspects of this and what the workforce needs are. They've done a lot of work with the onshore wind industry, and now are looking to help support offshore. Directly, no, we haven't really done anything directly with NREL, but they have been supporting the industry as we're looking to build out.
Okay, people have been interested in how this project works within or among other major plans for the Bridgeport Harbor area. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so we're going to be working with the city and with the port to help develop some of the Barnum Landing area. I know that the city has plans to do a ferry terminal, the Long Island Ferry that goes to Port Jefferson. The city has plans to move it to the site where the project will be built. So that will be part of, you know, our Jen, what's the word? Development, I guess. Yeah. So yes.
Great. Jen, anything to add, or should we move on to the next question?
No, Julie Marr's our Bridgeport Barnum Landing expert. So
okay, terrific.
If you have any more detailed questions, her email's up on the slide right now.
Okay, terrific. The project will install massive wind turbines. Question, will high altitude energy technology, 1/10 the mass of surface turbines, be considered? Sky Sails has systems completing real world performance demos.
I can't say I'm familiar with that particular technology. So again, if whoever answered the question would like to share that with us, our emails are up on the screen.
Okay, yeah, and if that question owner wants to drop a link into the chat, that's fine too. Another thing about the turbines, they're just off Block Island. Are they in the blue leasing zone on this map or a separate smaller project? Small and spotty groups both on the land and in the water. So it looks like somebody, you know, really looking closely at the map and wondering about the turbine locations.
Yes, the block. Sorry,
Yeah,
Julie.
Yeah,
Go
do
ahead.
you want to go back to the map real quick, just so they can see where it kind of is?
Yeah, so they're asking about Block Island, which I think is right on in between this MW on the Revolution Wind. So the thing with Block Island is it's very near shore. So that project is built within 3 miles of state waters. So it's not a federal waters leasing issue. So that's why they're not included on this. This is all the federal leases, which means it's happening in waters outside of 3 miles from shore. Within 3 miles, it's a state project.
Great, thanks. How do you account for rising seas and worsening storms as part of your model for what to build now, but also what conditions may be like in 5, 10, or 20 years?
I can take that one. I mean, we certainly do all sorts of modeling on weather conditions, how the technology is going to hold up in kind of what sort of reasonably anticipatable, if that's a word, what we can reasonably anticipate in terms of storms. Of course, I think we can all recognize, especially those of us in the renewable energy world, that climate change is a real thing. Storms are worsening. So we do take that into account with the modeling. In terms of the infrastructure and sea level rise, everything we build is built to be used in the marine environment. So even our cable that comes to shore is buried under the turbine area all the way to the substation on land. So it is built for that, for being in the sea. In terms of sea level rise, I mean, these are massive infrastructure projects, so they are built for big waves, sea conditions. 10 foot of sea level rise, I would think would have some impact on us out there. But again, kind of looking at the scale of what we're building, there's a lot more concerning impacts on shore. Like this right here is built to be, take large waves in big storms. The technology of the blades is built to shut down when winds get too high if we are in some sort of hurricane situation. So it is one of those where we're accommodating for that as best we can, with what we can reasonably anticipate. Any sort of extreme situations that are completely outside the realm of what we think would be reasonable are going to be hard to plan any sort of infrastructure for.
Great, thanks. We've got 3 more questions to cover, and I think that includes the time we have. So thanks for everybody who dropped the questions in. The next one is, are the local CT utilities invested in these projects? And if so, how extensively?
Apologies, that's my doorbell. I don't know what's going on, but Pura is one of the, and I don't know if that's what you mean by local utilities, but they are one of the people who are, bodies who had to give us a special, permitting. So Jen, I don't know if you can go a little bit more into detail on that, but we are working with them.
Yeah, there are in some states, like here in Massachusetts, Eversource is partnered with an offshore wind developer to construct their wind turbines. Our ownership, we don't have any local utilities. That said, like Julie Marr referenced, when we bid into Connecticut, we won. The state awarded us the opportunity to sign contracts with the local utilities. So that's the process, the PURA process that we've been going through. We'll be able to sign a 20-year contract for the energy, which is one of the benefits of renewables, is that we know what it will cost many years out. And so though they're not direct investors, they're a big part of the process.
Great, thanks. What is the expected life of the turbines and what is the plan for their end of life?
Yeah, so we sign up for the lease of the area for or the ocean space for 25 years from the start of operation. The power contracts, like I said, go for 20 years from the start of operation. The turbines right now, I mean, they're built to go longer. So really what we'll do is at the end of those commitments, we will assess whether it's still efficient and reasonable to keep those turbines out there and producing energy, in which case we would kind of re-sign power contracts to keep the power flowing. We're kind of just hitting that phase in Europe where the first generation of offshore wind farms are being decommissioned and taken down. And it's not even that they're being taken down because they've outlived their useful lives. It's that the technology has come so far in the last 20 years that they're looking to replace those turbines with bigger, better, more efficient ones. There is a plan in place for decommissioning. And so similar to the environmental review process that we go through to construct the project, when we get towards the end of the lease and the power contracts, and we determine that it's time to take those turbines down, we will go through a similar permitting process with all the different agencies that have jurisdiction over different components of the project to determine the best path forward for removing the equipment with the least amount of impact. Sometimes that means entirely removing components like the turbines themselves. Other times, because of the way the seafloor has settled, it may mean leaving things where they are because it's more disruptive to remove them. But that is going to be a process that will have stakeholder engagement to make sure that everybody's happy with how the project gets removed from the waters. Before we even put a single component out in the water, we're required to set aside a bond with the federal government that will fully cover the cost of removing the equipment should anything happen in the interim or at the end of the life of the project. So in terms of cost issues, it's already set aside before we ever even build anything.
Cool. There's one last kind of question to bring everyone into this topic. Which counties in Connecticut are going to be served, and how do residents opt in or choose wind? Is it automatic? How will they change rates? Are we even that far to be able to discuss?
So I know Massachusetts has a program, I believe, that people can opt in. I don't know if that's the case with this one. We're going to be connected directly to the grid, and after that, the power kind of goes, where it goes. But Jen, do you know of any plan to have that in here?
I think if I understood the question, I think if I understood the question correctly, I mean, it's a challenge that we have in this country, especially, is that ratepayers don't always get to choose where they get their electricity from. And so essentially, if you are a ratepayer with a utility that is purchasing the power, you will be purchasing the offshore wind power. We don't really have that kind of opt-in system in Connecticut. There are a couple counties in Massachusetts, and to be perfectly honest, I'm not entirely sure if that's the case in Connecticut as well, where there's more of an option, like Julie Mar said. But if you are a ratepayer in Connecticut, this will get wrapped into your overall energy provider.
Okay, great. Do you want to just say one more time how people can contact you with any additional questions? Because that's all the time we have for today at the top of the hour.
Yeah, no, I would like to wrap it up if I may,
Of course.
Eleanor. As a lifetime sailor, I'm particularly mindful of the power that wind has, and I'm as an environmentalist, I'm really passionate about this as a project. So I'm really thankful for Jen and Julie Mar, I'm sorry, to share the insight of this project and how it can impact the Connecticut market in a very profound way over such a long term. So I wanted to, it's been interesting in sort of inquiring about the environmental metrics of this part of the world, because obviously Connecticut is, there's some very affluent areas, and I've been speaking to some people who tout their environmental sort of credentials as to how many Teslas they have in their driveway. But as we all know, if we're generating power from oil and so on, then you could be driving a coal-powered car. So I think it's really important to focus on the upstream issues that we have here, and very eloquently explained by Jen and Julie Mar. So thank you both for your generosity and your great work. And at this point, I'd like to suggest to the attendees that we do have a lounge that we can just break in and chat to. And I'm just about to drop the link in. You would have received it by email, but I'll do that again now. And thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you all for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to connect with you today.
Thank you.